Me, 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 me. Hello and welcome to 5-Year Club video number 66. Today I wanted to discuss this article I was reminded of that breaks down the top 1% from the view of someone who helps them manage their investments. There are a few articles that I remember out of the hundreds or thousands that I've read. This is one of them. I guess because it's so specific and because it's, I think, unique in the detail that the author goes into. And I wanted to share it tonight and read it for you because I think that when we think about our lives and how this financial system works and how this game works, a lot of people don't have much perspective beyond the situation that they're currently in or situations that they could see. And certainly most people don't have access to see the finances of the top 1%, but this guy does. And so by reading this article, I hope you can understand both how wealth is achievable, but also what level of wealth and why. And for people who are looking to build a ton of wealth and build lasting charitable foundations in their lifetime, it'll kind of clue you in on ways that will get you there and ways that will not get you there. And for people who are wondering kind of how much what kind of lifestyles different retirement levels provide, this article also gives a point of view on that. So I'm going to just start reading it now. The header, Who Rules America? This is the website's managed by Professor G. William Domhoff at the Sociology Department of the University of California, Santa Cruz. Power in America, an investment manager's view on the top 1%. I sit in an interesting chair in the financial services industry. Our clients largely fall into the top 1%, have a net worth of $5 million or above, and, if working, make over $300,000 per year. My observations on sources of their wealth and concerns come from my professional and social activities within this group. Work by various economists and tax experts make it indisputable that the top 1% controls a widely disproportionate share of the income and wealth in the United States. When does one enter the top 1%? I'll use K for 1,000 and M for 1 million, as we usually do when communicating with clients or discussing money. Thousands and millions take too much time to say. Available data isn't exact, but if family enters the top 1% or so today with somewhere around 300,000 to 400,000 in pre-tax annual income and over 1.2 million in net worth. Compared to the average American family with a pre-tax income in the mid-50,000 range and a net worth around 120,000, this probably seems like a lot of money. But there are big differences even within that top 1%, with the wealth distribution highly skewed toward the top 0.1%. The lower half of the top 1%. The 99th to 99.5th percentiles largely include physicians, attorneys, upper middle management, and small business people who have done well. Everyone's tax situation is, of course, a little different, but on earned income in this group, we can figure that somewhere around 25 to 30% of total pre-tax income will go to federal, state, and Social Security taxes, leaving them with around $250,000 to $300,000 post-tax. This group makes extensive use of 401ks, SEP IRAs, defined benefit plans, and other retirement vehicles. They have to protect themselves against taxes, which defer taxes until distribution during retirement. So these people are in very high tax brackets, and they have the money to contribute, so these retirement plans are very appealing to them. Typical would be yearly contributions in the 50,000 to 100,000 range, leaving our elite working group with yearly cash flows of 175 to 250,000 after taxes, or about 15,000 to 20,000 per month. Until recently, most studies just broke out the top 1% as a group. Data on net worth distributions within the top 1% indicate that one enters the top 0.5% with about $1.8 million, the top 0.25% with $3.1 million, the top 0.1% with $5.5 million, and the top 0.01% with $24.4 million. Wealth distribution is highly skewed towards the top 0.01%, increasing the overall average for this group. The net worth for those in the lower half of the top 1% is usually achieved after decades of education, hard work, saving, and investing as a professional or small business person. I want to repeat that. When we're talking about the first half of the top 1%, we're talking about people who achieved that wealth after decades of education, hard work, saving, and investing as a professional or small business person. In other words, the first half of that top 1% are generally people who are at the end of their career. They're old, and they were doctors, they were lawyers, they had to go to school for these things. They worked hard after they came out of school. They saved their income from when they were working hard. They invested that income. And being in the first half of the top 1% is the reward for consistently working hard and achieving financial success over time in respectable professions. While an after-tax income of $175,000 to $250,000 in net worth in the $1.2 million to $1.8 million range may seem like a lot of money to most Americans, it doesn't really buy freedom from financial worry or access to the true corridors of power and money. That doesn't become frequent until we reach the top 0.1%. I've had many discussions in the last few years with clients with only $5 million or under in assets, those in the 99th to 99.9th percentiles, as to whether they have enough money to retire or stay retired. That may sound strange to the 99% not in this group, but generally accepted safe retirement distribution rates for a 30-year period are in the 3 to 5% range, with 4% as the current industry standard. Assuming that the lower end of the top 1% has, say, $1.2 million in investment assets, their retirement income will be about $50,000 per year, plus maybe $30,000 to $40,000 from Social Security. So let's say $90,000 per year pre-tax and $75,000 to $80,000 post-tax if they wish to plan for 30 years of withdrawals. For those with $1.8 million in retirement assets, that rises to around $120,000 to $150,000 pre-tax and around $100,000 after tax. If someone retires with $5 million today, roughly the beginning rung for entry level into the top 0.1%, they can reasonably expect an income of $240,000 pre-tax and around $190,000 post-tax, including Social Security. While income and lifestyle are all relative, an after-tax income between $6.6 and $8.3 thousand per month today will hardly buy the fantasy lifestyle that most Americans see on TV and would consider rich. In many areas in California or the East Coast, this positions one squarely in the hard-working upper middle class, and strict budgeting will be essential. All right, so this 6.6 to 8.3 scenario, 6.6 is going to be about $80,000 in post-tax income. So that was, the that was the first half of the top 1%, I believe. Well, that's the $1.2 million figure. And, in my area, if you want to rent a modest home, it's $3,000 to $4,000 a month. And so if you're only withdrawing, $6,000 to $8,000, half of your income is now going to paying for housing and retirement. That's kind of scary. And these are people who are in the top 1%. And half of their income in retirement goes towards paying for a house, obviously, if they're renting. If they own the house, good for them. But the point is, rent is extremely expensive here. And so being in the top 1% when you're in San Jose looks a lot like just living in a little 1950s bungalow down the street. An income of $190,000 post-tax or $15,800 per month will certainly buy a nice lifestyle, but is far from rich. And for those folks who made enough to accumulate this much wealth during their working lives, the reduction in income and lifestyle during retirement can be stressful. I'd like to stop a second and pay attention to this sentence also. When I discuss what I think people need to be financially independent, I intentionally pick a formula where you're spending the same amount while you're working and you're spending the same amount after you're working. I don't pick a formula where you work spending a certain amount and then retire spending half that amount. And specifically, I do that because a lot of people have a lot of psychological, emotional trouble spending less money. And we know this anyway because when you talk to people about, you need to increase your savings rate, well, a lot of times that means you need to spend less money, and it makes them anxious and worried, and it's a negative feeling associated with that. And I wanted to stop here because I wanted to point out that even people who are very well off, even people who have post-tax of $15,800 per month, still have psychological stress around changing their behavior, around decreasing their expenditure. So it really doesn't matter kind of what your wealth level is. What matters is the relative change from one month to the next in terms of, okay, now you're forced to change these, 6 key spending behaviors that you are depending upon for your happiness for the last 20 years. And that's very stressful, and it doesn't matter if you're wealthy or not. So regardless of where you are in this income range, I want you to pay attention to that. I want you to know that your spending level is a liability to the extent that if your spending decreases in the future, it's going to make you unhappy. And so to the extent that you can figure out how to be happy spending less money, that's going to decrease your emotional risk in the future if there are financial complications. All right, let's keep going. Plus, watching retirement accounts deplete over time isn't fun, not to mention the ever-fluctuating value of these accounts and the desire of many to leave a substantial inheritance. Our poor lower half of the top 1% lives well, but does have financial worries. Since the majority of those in this group actually earned their money from professions and smaller businesses, they generally don't participate in the benefits big money enjoys. Those in the 99th to 99.5th percentile lack access to power. For example, most physicians today are having their incomes reduced by HMOs, PPOs, and cost controls from Medicare and insurance companies. The legal profession is suffering from excess capacity, declining demand, and global outsourcing. Successful small businesses struggle with increasing regulation and taxation. I speak daily with these relative winners in the economic hierarchy, and many express frustration. Unlike those in the lower half of the top 1%, those in the top half, and particularly top 0.1%, can often borrow for almost nothing, keeping profits and production overseas, holding personal assets in tax havens, riding out down markets and economies, and influence legislation in the U.S. They have access to the very best in accounting firms, tax and other attorneys, numerous consultants, private wealth managers, a network of other wealthy and powerful friends, lucrative business opportunities, and many other benefits. Most of those in the bottom half of the top 1% lack power and global flexibility and are essentially well-compensated workhorses for the top 0.5%, just like the bottom 99%. Let's say that again. Most of those in the bottom half of the top 1% lack power and global flexibility and are essentially well-compensated workhorses for the top 0.5%, just like the bottom 99%. So, just think about that. If you're a well-compensated corporate attorney, it's going to be hard to make it past the top 99.99.5%. And a lot of times those people are doing the taxes for the people in the, top 0.1%. So when we're talking about the top 1%, are you telling me that like the doctor who worked really hard and took out a bunch of student loans and, got through a residency and then had to work all kinds of crazy hours and on-call hours and got to the end of his career and has, over $1 million, but also has worked really hard for the past 40 years to get there, and this is the evil top 1% guy? No. There's different levels in the top 1%. In my view, the American dream of striking it rich is merely a well-marketed fantasy that keeps the bottom 99.5% hoping for better and prevents social and political instability. The odds of getting into that top 0.5% are slim, and the door is kept firmly shut by those within it. I think this is interesting because he's defining the American dream as being like really, really freaking wealthy, whereas other people define it as like, white picket fence house in an SUV. Everyone's got a different opinion. All right. The upper half of the top 1%. Membership in this elite group is likely to come from being involved in some aspect of the financial services or banking industry, real estate development involved with those industries, or government contracting. Some hardworking and clever physicians and attorneys can acquire as much as $15 to $20 million before retirement, but they are rare. Those in the top 0.5% have incomes over $500,000 if working and a net worth over $1.8 million if retired. The higher we go up into the top 0.5%, the more likely it is that their wealth is in some way tied to the investment industry and borrowed money than from personally selling goods or services or labor, as do most in the bottom 99.5%. They are much more likely to have built their net worth from stock options and capital gains in stock, in real estate, in private business sales, not from income which is taxed at a much higher rate. These opportunities are largely unavailable to the bottom 99.5%. Recently, I spoke with a younger client who retired from a major investment bank in her early 30s, net worth around $8 million. We can estimate that she had earned somewhere around twice that, or $14 to $16 million, in order to keep $8 million after taxes and live well along the way. An impressive accomplishment by such an early age. Since I knew she held a critical view of investment banking, I asked if her colleagues talked about or understood how much damage was created in the broader economy from their activities. Her answer was that no one talks about it in public, but almost all understood and were unbelievably cynical, hoping to exit the system when they became rich enough. Folks in the top 0.1% come from many backgrounds, but it's infrequent to meet one whose wealth wasn't acquired through direct or indirect participation in the financial and banking industries. Let's repeat that. Folks in the top 0.1% come from many different backgrounds, but it's infrequent to meet one whose wealth wasn't acquired through direct or indirect participation in the financial and banking industries. If you want to be one of the wealthiest people in America, you need to be a banker. That's it. One of our clients, net worth in the $60 million range, built a small company and was acquired with stock from a multinational. Stock is often called a paper asset. Another client, CEO of a medium-cap tech company, retired with a net worth in the $70 million range. The bulk of any CEO's wealth comes from stock, not from income, and incomes are also very high. Last year, the average S&P 500 CEO made $9 million in all forms of compensation. One client runs a division of a major international investment bank, net worth in the $30 million range, and most of the profits from his division flow directly or indirectly from the public sector, the taxpayer. Another client with a net worth in the $10 million range is the ex-wife of a managing director of a major investment bank, while another was able to amass $12 million after taxes by her early 30s from stock options as a high-level programmer in a successful IT company. The picture is clear. Entry into the top 0.5%, and in particular the top 0.1%, is usually the result of some association with the financial industry and its creations. I find it questionable as to whether the majority in this group actually adds value or simply diverts value from the U.S. economy and business into its pockets and the pockets of the uber wealthy who hire them. They are, of course, doing nothing illegal. He finds it questionable. I think you have to have a separate article on this, and you have to break down exactly what these people are doing. Certainly, if you look at the finance industry and you look at someone, say, who's doing high-frequency trading to front-run trades, yeah, those people are leeches on the economy, and they made hundreds of millions of dollars off of it, and they did not add value at all. I think if someone is investing in a lot of like risky tech companies as a VC and they get money back from that, that seems productive to me. Those tech companies are building valuable goods and services. And the ones that don't build valuable goods and services tend to go out of business. And the investors lose their money. I think it's important to emphasize one of the dangers of wealth concentration: irresponsibility about the wider economic consequences of their actions by those at the top. Wall Street created the investment products that produce gross economic imbalances and the 2008 credit crisis. It wasn't the hardworking 99.5%. Average people could only destroy themselves financially, not the economic system. There's plenty of blame to go around, but the collapse was primarily due to the failure of complex mortgage derivatives, CDS credit swaps, cheap Fed money, lax regulation, compromised rating agencies, government involvement in the mortgage market, the end of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, and insufficient bank capital. Only Wall Street could put the economy at risk, and it had an excellent reason to do so: profit. It made huge profits in the build-up to the credit crisis, and huge profits when it sold itself as too big to fail, and received massive government and Federal Reserve bailouts. Most of the serious economic damage to the U.S. is struggling with today was done by the top 0.1%, and they benefited greatly from it. And all of this is certainly true. The government bailout allowed people at these banks to take irresponsible risks. And, those risks were like giving people who couldn't afford them mortgages, and the people defaulted on the mortgage. That's not a productive enterprise. Lending money to people who can't pay back is not a productive enterprise. So I agree with him on that. Not surprisingly, Wall Street and the top of corporate America are doing extremely well as of June 2011. For example, in Q1 of 2011, America's top corporations reported 31% profit growth and a 31% reduction in taxes, the latter due to profit outsourcing to low tax rate countries. Somewhere around 40% of the profits in the S&P 500 come from overseas and stay overseas, with about half of these 500 top corporations having their headquarters in tax havens. If the corporations don't repatriate their profits, they pay no U.S. taxes. The year 2010 was a record year for compensation on Wall Street, where corporate CEO compensation rose by over 30%. Most Americans struggled. In 2010, a dozen major companies, including GE, Verizon, Boeing, Wells Fargo, and the Fed and FedEx, paid U.S. tax rates between minus 0.7% and minus 9.2%. Production, employment, profits, and taxes have all been outsourced. Major U.S. corporations are currently lobbying to have another tax repatriation window like that in 2004, where they can bring back corporate profits at a 5.25% tax rate versus the usual 35% U.S. corporate tax rate. Ordinary working citizens with the lowest incomes are taxed at 10%. So, looking at this, all right. So I think if companies are well structured, then their profit, so their profit growth should impact the price of their stock, and it should impact any dividends that stock might pay, and therefore holders of the stock would benefit from that. The bottom 50% of people in the U.S. do not own any stock, and so this is going to help them. But the top 50% do, and so if these corporations are healthy, then their profits are not going to be all funneled to the top executives. Their profits are going to be funneled to the shareholders. Excessive executive compensation is its own issue, and I think it's up to shareholders and investors to choose companies who have appropriate executive compensation. And I think it's healthy for everyone for, profits to grow in corporations. I would like to increase participation in stock ownership. So I believe in retirement programs that are opt-out, where when you get paid, they're automatically going to stick, 10%, 15%, whatever it is, of your money into an index fund, which would include the top corporations and which would benefit from this growth in profit. And I would like to see everybody in America who receives a paycheck be automatically opted into that system. And then this would not be a 1% issue for corporations to be making profit. It would just be a positive thing for most working people. As far as, tax rates go on corporations, again, I think you have to look at kind of the benefits of taxing corporations for people versus the benefits of healthy economic activity going on. I don't think it's the automatic assumption that like taxes are good but corporate profits are not good. That's going to be on a spectrum. Like obviously taxing them 100% is bad, and if you taxed everybody 0%, then I imagine there would be a lot of things the government could not pay for, and I don't think that everything the government does is bad. But when you discuss this issue, I don't think you can make a blanket statement like, this is, these are the numbers and this is good, these are the numbers, this is bad. I think you have to discuss it in terms of like, this is the framework I use to evaluate taxes versus profits and what I think of what a healthy balance is. I could go on and on, but the bottom line is this. A highly complex set of laws and exemptions from laws and taxes has been put in place by those in the uppermost reaches of the U.S. financial system. It allows them to protect and increase their wealth and significantly affects the U.S. political and legislative processes. They have real power and real wealth. Ordinary citizens in the bottom 99.9% are largely not aware of these systems, do not understand how they work, are unlikely to participate in them, and have little likelihood of entering the top 0.5%, much less the top 0.1%. Moreover, those at the very top have no incentive whatsoever for revealing or changing the rules. I'm not optimistic. And I think he's completely right about that too. So this is, the article's a mixed bag for me. There's a bunch of weird financial manipulation you can do when you become really, really wealthy to gain significant tax advantages that people with less wealth can't touch it. And even if you just look at investment options, I think one share of Berkshire Hathaway is like over $100,000, $250,000, something crazy. And it's an excellent company, and it's made a lot of profit and served its shareholders really well, and you can't participate in that unless you have a tremendous amount of money. And that's just one tiny example. And I'm just going to leave this here. I'm going to leave the links to this article and to his follow-up article from 2014 in the description of the video, because I don't want to make this too long, even though this video is likely already too long. I encourage you to read this article, reread the article, read your own articles, and understand that the top 1% is not full of nothing but evil bankers. It's full of a bunch of good people too, and yep, there are some evil bankers. That's it. All right, that's it for video number 66. Have a fabulous evening.